anyone with an interest in Palmyra. I am Gera Stilwell, Mrs. John Stilwell Jr., and my partner in this project is Bob Fey. I lived in Palmyra and on a farm north of Palmyra the first 21 years of my life until 1956. Now I have taught kindergarten for Palmyra-Bennet, District OR1, the last 32 years, 1968 to the present. I attended Palmyra School grades 1 through 12, 1941 to 1953. There was no kindergarten at that time. Bob Fey grew up in Unadilla and has lived in Palmyra 50 years. Barb Fey is a descendant of the McKees, who were prominent in Palmyra's history. First, and then we'll get the bricks, okay? Palmyra School was Odo County District 60. This part of the school was built in 1934-35, following a fire that destroyed the previous 1905 brick school at this same location during Christmas vacation 1933. Dorothy Lucas Palmer, class of 1926, was running a switchboard at the time. They had school all over town while the new school was built. Before that, the school was on the triangular piece of land now shared by the library and a home. Is where the Wintons, Hergenraders, Goldens, Royals, and Fred Haley's lived. That wooden school was torn down in 1906 and the lumber used for a barn for Severe's, northeast of Palmyra. That school at the north end of Main Street had 2 rooms downstairs and 1 room upstairs and was not separated into grades until 1889. One source mentioned a Palmyra public school in 1870. The school only went through 10th grade until 1918 when it had all 12 grades. There was a school annex west of the 1905 building for 6th, 7th, and 8th that later became the Legion Hall. Those triangular pieces of land were gifts from the Taggarts. This 1935 building was red brick, as you can see in the exposed portions here, and one is an improvement in that indoor plumbing, a gym or auditorium, and stage were included. Previous to that, basketball games, plays, and graduations were held downtown in Nash's Hall, where the activity center is now. The 1935 building was enlarged. The 1935 building was enlarged with a bond issue passing in 1953 to include the first kitchen for hot lunches, home ec shop and kindergarten on the north, and a larger gym. The addition extended north and the gym was enlarged by running it east and west, whereas the 1935 gym ran north and south. The first hot lunches were served in 1954-55. Kindergarten started in 1950 and was combined with first and second in the primary room on the south end of the building. Grade building. Grades were the grammar room that was east of the stage. There were windows all along the east and they can still be seen along the ramp. The current principal's office is where the stage and grammar room were. High school classes were held upstairs. Each family was responsible for getting its children to school before school buses were provided in 1963. Some rode horses and kept them in barns in town. Surrounding country schools closed and enrollment grew so that each teacher taught only 1 elementary grade. The Bennet and Palmyra districts merged in 1965 with the elementary at Bennet and grades 7 through 12 at Palmyra. Football and track and girls basketball were added. Wrestling and golf are now available. The Palmyra kindergarten did not move to Bennet until 1986. There was more need to be with the rest of the elementary after kindergarten was changed to a full day on alternating days to save fuel during the energy crisis. This year, 2000-2001, will be the first for full-time kindergarten. On the north, a rural school was moved to the grounds with a basement level added to provide more space before the elementary moved to Bennet. A metal building was added in the 1970s for more high school classrooms. An addition in 1982 went to the east and connected the existing building to the big new gym, stage, balcony, weight room, kitchen, office, shop, classroom, and commons area, or lunchroom. was passed on the first vote in the fall of 1996 to add on and remodel both the Bennet and Palmyra buildings. The 1996-98 brick two-level addition on the north adds classrooms, improved music facilities, computer lab, and new media center, and much needed parking. Was April 27, 1999. Church was started in 1861 when priests would come on horseback from the Nebraska City German church about once a month. Private homes and the school were used before a frame church was built in 1874. A brick church was dedicated in 1889. The rectory, or home for the priest, was funded by fairs that lasted as much as 8 days. Of Palmyra's St. Leo's also serves the Douglas and Cheney churches. The first baptism was in the school in 1870. The first cemetery was southwest of town, and the present cemetery was bought from John Taggart. The 1874 church was north of the present one. An annual celebration was held August 15th, after the 1889 church was dedicated, with a picnic on the lawn, bingo, and homemade ice cream. Alice Beecham Janucki wrote the church history for the centennial in 1989. Other longtime Catholic families are the Malones, Donovans, Van Akerens, Beechams, Royals, Kellys, Roaches, and Mahoneys. In 1875, there were 12 charter members of the Presbyterian Church, including 2 Thompsons. They met in the schoolhouse in 1871 and erected a church on this present site the next year. The 1901 original building was moved north and east and was the home of the Witherows, who ran the newspaper, the Palmyra Items, and later was the home of their daughter and family, Mary Conklin, and since has been removed. It also was the home of the Arthur Lamberns family. The basement was added in 1925. A Sunday school room was added to the east about 1950. The church is an example of a slanted floor with the low end being on the northwest. From about 1921 to 1925, one pastor served both the Presbyterian and Methodist churches, and that was called a federation. At present, the Sunday schools are combined. A new minister's home or manse was built in 1953. The 1996 addition is a new basement, front steps, and ramps on the west side to make the basement handicapped accessible. An elevator is being planned. The church's 125th anniversary was celebrated in June. Longtime Presbyterian families are the Millers, Olsons, Lamberns, Hallowells, Doties, Thompsons, Nashes, Wilhelms, Mabens, Stedmans, Wallens, Fies, and Powerses. The Presbyterian minister also serves the Hopewell Church south of Unadilla and recently includes Dunbar as well. Methodist services started in 1865 in private homes. The first building used in 1874 through 1890 was brought from Bennet and was later sold and moved to the south part of town for a home. A new church was built in 1890 and it was remodeled and a basement added in 1926. The first house north of the parsonage was the parsonage until it was sold in 1945. There have been many student pastors from Wesleyan University in Lincoln. The Methodist ladies earned money at a food stand at Old Settlers Picnic to pay for sidewalks in 1892, and the food stand continued for many years with the churches taking turns alphabetically. Longtime Methodist families are the Stanleys, Monahans, Harts, G's, Wemples, Stoners, Smiths, Dowdings, Severes, Stilwells, Lashleys, and Halversons. The Methodist Church is at the north end of Main Street. In 1871, the first pastor of the Baptist Church was John M. Taggart, founder of Palmyra. The church was finished in July 1879. They baptized in the Nemaha River until they had a church. During the first 60 years, twice as many died or moved than were left. 1907 is on...
I can't see it. There it is.
A basement was added, and the parsonage next door was torn down. They voted to close in 1978. Longtime members were the Lannings, Taylors, Douglases, Rotons, Morrells, Flaggs, Dowdings, and Rudges. Today it is being remodeled as a home for the Jangula family. 12 Lutheran families began holding services at the Nash Jensen Legion Hall in 1979 and have since built this in 1984 and added on in 1991. Some of these Lutheran families are the Roy Thompsons, Schroeders, Carters, Straubys, Lees, and Smiths. Across the street east, 3 rows of houses were built in the 1960s on Mahoney's addition, and that has added to Palmyra's population. In the past, in the fall of the year, the churches took turns having the annual suppers and bazaars in this order: Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, and Catholic. John M. Taggart, 1817 through 1887, built the first church in the state at Brownville. He designed and contracted the building of Nebraska City High School in 1865. He came on to Palmyra and gave half his homestead for the town. 1870, and gave land for the 4 churches, a park, and a school in 1871. There were settlers in the area as early as 1856. The railroad came in 1871 and was the end of the line for a time. His daughter Jeanette named Palmyra after an ancient city in Asia Minor and their hometown in New York. He was a Baptist minister, architect, stonecutter, and a member of the territorial legislature. R.M. Taggart was the postmaster, taught school, and bought the lumber yard in 1880. Many of the trees in the park died. They had a community tree planting bee on Arbor Day one year. The Taggart home was west of the school, where the present football field is, near the Dan Snyder home. The family lived there in the 1950s, and it was moved to its present location 1 block south of the Baptist church when the school added football and track. Palmyra is unusual in that Illinois Street is what is known as the Angling Street and runs from the north intersection of Main Street to the park. Taggart Park has been the location of many Old Settlers picnics since 1899. Band concerts were important, so there was a bandstand in the center of the park until vandals burned it in 1973. The slide was given in memory of John M. Stilwell Sr. in 1976. Since there no longer was a bandstand, a gazebo was added. The depot was torn down, and its lumber was used for a shelter built by Bob Fey and others for the bicentennial in 1976. You can see the original Palmyra sign inside. A tennis court, ball field, and basketball courts were added in the 1980s, and a sand volleyball court was added in the 1990s. Other ball fields have been in the pasture southeast of the elevator on Charlie Morrell's, north of the present field, and west of the current football field. During World War II, there was a ground observer's court platform in the park, and people took turns watching for enemy planes. The Old Settlers Picnic started in 1887, and early June has been the usual time. Squire Edwin H. Baldwin, Floyd's ancestor, who came to Palmyra from New York in 1877, O.A. Sevier, E.C. Rudge, and the McKees were early promoters. The early picnics were at the McKee Grove south of Palmyra. They included a half-mile racetrack for horses and a ball field south of the elevator on the west side of the road, and the Cameron track and amphitheater was also across the road north and east of the former lumber yard, now used by the co-op. Old Doc Cameron raised horses. The wire fence without barbs can still be seen. It was east of the bridge. People came by train to attend, and political speakers were included, such as the governor, or William Jennings Bryan. J. Sterling Morton delivered the address in 1890. The trains came from east to west, and an excursion train came down from Lincoln for the picnic. It cost 3 cents a mile to ride, 48 cents to Eagle, and 72 cents to Lincoln. People stayed in Lincoln about 4 hours before the return trip. There were 2 coaches and a mail or express car. The old merry-go-rounds were steam or horse-drawn, and one even was pushed by the owner. There were no annual picnics for several years during World War I. Wooden sections were bolted together for a dance floor. Carnivals at the park were popular in the 1940s and 50s. There have been parades for many years and dances. Charlie Thompson and Adolph Schroeder enjoyed being clowns. Winifred Lanning Dowding wrote a history of the Old Settlers Picnic in 1987, its centennial year. You may borrow it and other information at the Odo County Museum in Syracuse. The last 2 years, Bennet and Palmyra have combined their celebration. The Big Red Sawmill offers custom log cutting, lumber, and firewood, and is owned by Brian Swaninger. This was formerly the home of Charlie Morrow's, Stranithon's, and Dean Steinkuhler. Part of the 1933 picnic was the dedication of the Oregon Trail marker 1/2 mile south of Palmyra on the Douglas Road. This commemorates the second night stop on the Western Trail from Nebraska City to Fort Kearny to Denver. Midland Pacific Railway tracks were laid parallel to the trail. The stones of the marker were gathered from the foundation of the Oakley store in use in 1867, now the Springman Farm, southeast of Palmyra. Trail marks can still be seen on farms southeast of the marker, and west also. The overnight camp was 1/2 mile west of the marker. The trail angles northwest. 1867 is the same year Nebraska became a state. Palmyra was incorporated May 5, 1882. Frazee, formerly of Omaha, live across the road to the southwest and raise chemical-free tomatoes and sell to 16 stores in Lincoln, Omaha, Nebraska City, Plattsmouth, Waverly, Hickman, and Tecumseh. They settled here in 1992 because it was an affordable acreage near Lincoln and Omaha. This is the Little Nemaha River, south of the railroad tracks, south of the elevators. There were conflicting reports of population, so I called the State Historical Society, and they gave me the following report from Blue Books. 1870, the population was 886. 1880, 239. 1900, 301. 1910, 334. 1920, 317. 1930, 344. 1940, 401. 1950, 372. 1960, 377. 1970, 386. 1980, 512. And 1900, 545. The current trend is growth due to the close proximity to Lincoln jobs. The big question is why the population dropped so drastically first 10 years from 886 to 239. One guess is that when Lincoln was chosen as the capital, it boomed from a village to 30,000. Lincoln's 1990 population was about 192,000. Perhaps Palmyra people went for jobs. Also, grasshoppers ruined crops in 1873 or 1874 and 1877. And in 1896, the crops were almost totally destroyed and corn was 13 cents a bushel. Settlers may have gone back home. The figures for 1940 to the present were supplied by the Department of Economic Development Research Division. You can read about Palmyra at the Palmyra Public Library and at the Odo County Museum at Syracuse, which also has a few cassettes of historical interviews. In very early times, it is believed that Johnny Michael's log cabin northwest of Palmyra, where 4 sections meet on Earl Luff land, was the only place between here and Lincoln. The cabin was in the middle of the road, so the wife could sleep on one side and the husband on the other to fulfill the homestead requirements of 5 years residency for free land. It was not unusual for Indians to come through, and they were so hungry they would eat the dogs. This is the Odo County Maintenance Building. There was a cafe briefly here in the 1950s, Gordon's. In the next building, Chris Sorensen and his cousin James Christensen owned the blacksmith shop from 1914 to 1928. Chris continued until 1948. Later, Merle Sorensen owned and operated the machine shop, and his son Jim also worked there. It was in the Sorensen family over 80 years. You could buy gasoline here. Our garage, the co-op, the Roy Thompson home, and at Bill Guy's to the corner north on Highway 2. Long ago, there was a livery stable at this location. People didn't have cars and would hire a horse and buggy or wagon and driver to take them to the next town. South of Sorensen's was a creamery run by Chet and Beatrice Lamb Kellogg, and later Harley Cleach. Farmers brought eggs, milk, and cream to sell to Fairmont Company. Beatrice taught the primary room for many years. A small ice house was next. People needed big blocks of ice for their ice boxes before they had electric refrigerators. Farmers got electricity about 1940. The ice boxes were made of wood and metal. Lana Schroeder Marco's beauty shop was formerly a doll museum, and Roy Lanning's and Royal's standard filling station before that. In the early days, the Opera House was on this corner and burned in 1913. Brick buildings for a bank and furniture store also burned near this location. Bill Fillmore had a shoe repair in a trailer, the next building east. And then there is the fire barn, which was the former location of Bill Royal's blacksmith and machine shop. Small towns have volunteer firemen. In 1998, Merle Sorensen was honored for 50 years service, Leslie Weatherhog 40 years, and Jim Sorensen 23 years. The next building is now owned by John Halverson and was formerly Bill Smith and Ed McKees' DeKalb seed corn and insurance building. It also was the L.G. Nash Implement Store or Harness Shop, which was the first Catholic church building moved and remodeled. On the corner, John Pump had a filling station in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, so the businesses extended a block east of Main Street. John Pump, a man who had lost an arm, operated a gas station between 5C and 5B streets. His station was on the north side of the street, next to the metal-covered storage shed. It was a 6-sided wooden building, a chicken brooder house. The foundation for the gas pump is still visible. John had a mechanical hook to replace the missing arm. This enabled him to lift and dump gasoline or kerosene into 50-gallon barrels, a common source of fuel storage at that time. He used a Model T Ford tank wagon to deliver fuel to rural customers. Weatherhog's ancestors homesteaded southwest of Palmyra. The Homestead Act of 1862 offered 160 acres of free land if people would live on and improve their claim 5 years. People came from New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Indiana. Thomas Weatherhog came to Nebraska in 1865. Charles Weatherhog had orchards with hundreds of bushels of fruit and Poland China hogs. Weatherhog's store, or the People's Variety Store, was run by 3 generations: George and Ada, Albert and Augusta, and Bill and Esther. Besides groceries, they sold fabric, bulk peanuts, had vinegar in a barrel, and had living quarters on the east end. There was an open box elevator to the basement. Their store on the corner was a popular place for the women to sit and visit when they came to town Saturday nights. The kids would write graffiti on the north side of the building, such as Gera loves Johnny. Later it was the Palmyra Peddlers Consignment Auction Building, but was burned by an arsonist in 1999. The Palmyra Items, 1885 through 1947, was the local weekly newspaper. In 1919, it cost 3 cents. C.A. Sweet Jr., 1883 through 1959, was the youngest editor in the United States from 1902 to 1916, when he was ages 19 through 33. Printed in the items to Charlie. This Sweet family was related to 2 generations of Sweets of the Nebraska City News Press. You can see microfilm of the Palmyra items at the State Historical Society in Lincoln. Later, Mr. Sweet was assistant bank cashier and was manager and cashier. Bill Weatherhog's Uncle Bill worked at the paper. Beautiful language was used in these old papers. The C.E. Witherows ran the paper with the help of their daughter, Mary Conklin, most of its last 25 years. She taught at Palmyra High School and sponsored the school paper, the High Times, for many years. This building now belongs to Clinton Nash. Further down the block, Art Ransford's had a meat market, Harry Hall's, and had a cream station. Andy Donovan switched from the meat business to real estate in 1909. Frank Wyman, a big barber shop, and Irene Gray Dowding had a beauty shop in the same building in 1935. Wyman left in 1942 to barber at the Lincoln Air Base during World War II. Bud Erlin was the barber and had a liquor store in the 1950s and 60s, and Rod Hespin was across the street briefly. Most recently, the building was a laundromat owned by Jimmy Kohler. The first telephone office was located here. There was a rather large building, which was a cafe, where Bill's is now. Then when Bill's store, later, they had a big wooden screen on the east and boards on concrete blocks for seats for the free shows Wednesdays and Saturday nights. The businessman paid a traveling projector owner who went to several small towns around for weekly free shows at Eagle and Unadilla also.